To Mr. Swazi first. He's chairing another hearing at the same time as this, so we'll go to him first for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you, Senator Rubio, for your holding this hearing as well. I want to thank my colleague, Chris Smith, for his long-standing work on human rights issues, and especially for working together with me on the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act of 2019. I want to thank the witnesses for being here today. You know, you see the president on television with the leader of China, and it looks kind of like it's just another normal relationship, but there's really something extreme going on that you're educating the public about. And the American people do not realize, despite the reports in major periodicals and reports that you've done and people that pay attention, like the people on this committee, most Americans do not realize what's happening. And I sound like a broken record, but most Americans have believed ever since Nixon went to China that the more that China was exposed to the United States of America and the West, that they'd become more like us, that they'd adopt our way of life as far as capitalism, they would adopt our way of life as far as democracy and human rights, and obviously that just hasn't happened. And this is one of the most blatant examples of the way that the Chinese Communist Party and government treat the people. It started with the Tibetans, and we see it unfolding in the newspapers and on television in Hong Kong, but this is really one of the grossest examples of human repression that's taking place in the world today. And China, as it makes its efforts to become more and more of a global power, economically, technologically, militarily, wants to export its way of life to other people. And this is their way of life. This is the way they want to treat people, their own people. So I want to go to you, Mr. Zenz, where you talked about this as being an economic model. You know, when most of us have looked at this, certainly when I've looked at this, we've thought about it as being a way to promote conformity, to repress people, religious persecution. But you're saying that this is also an economic model. And if you look at the industries that are being, this forced labor is being used for, it's usually low-skilled, standardized mass production. It's not the future of high technology and things like that. This is a way to get cheap labor for standardized mass production. How much of what's going on with the Uyghurs, especially, and the forced labor that's taking place, do you see as being a way to get conformity and repression of a religious minority, and how much of it do you see as being an economic model? And I know this is not a precise thing, but is it a 50-50 thing, or is it 80% repression and conformity and 20% economic model? Well, how do you view that?
The primary goal of Beijing in Xinjiang is to secure the long-term power and survival and rule of the Communist Party. For a communist regime, securing power and ideological supremacy through labor is ideologically consistent. It goes hand in hand. I argue that the ideological goals are primary and the economic goals are secondary. But even so, the economic goals are very important because, as we have seen, economic success is now the main driver of the CCP's power in the world, the reason why China is powerful. And I believe they're extending their business model in Xinjiang. They're killing a whole bunch of birds with one single stone.
So when they're using this economic model, I think it's important for us to publicize the fact that, and I wasn't even aware of the extent of this until I prepared for this hearing, that how many American companies are using the products that are being produced from this forced labor in Xinjiang. So we see that there was a Wall Street Journal report back in May of 2019 that supply chains of Adidas, Campbell Soup, Kraft Heinz Company, Coca-Cola, and The Gap, and I see also, and I don't know where this came from, but it's in some of my materials that I prepared for this, that there's yarn reportedly entered the supply chain for H&M and Esprit, that there's also supplied clothing for Calvin Klein, Tommy Hilfiger, Nike, Patagonia. Is it even more extensive than the companies that I've mentioned that are using these products that are being produced with forced labor in these internment camps, re-education camps? Is it even more extensive than the companies that I've mentioned here?
3 points on this. The first point is that this is subject to further research, because it likely is much more expensive than we all realize. Secondly, Xinjiang produces 84% of China's cotton, and China produces more than a quarter of the world's cotton, supplying cotton to Bangladesh, almost half of Bangladesh's cotton, etc. Now we need to establish the exact dynamics of what all is made with forced labor, what is made with involuntary labor. But I'll give you one example. He Tian Taida, who was just subject to the Customs and Border Protection detention order, days before this detention order came into effect, He Tian Taida shipped 1.2 million items of baby pajamas and baby sleeper blankets with the destination Costco, and Costco started and was going to sell them and put them up on their website until they decided to pull it. I personally went to a Costco in Minnesota and asked about these baby clothes, and they said, yeah, we had them, but for some reason, we just got an order from management to put them off the shelves for now.
So, you know, it's important that we remind people that this is internment. People are being imprisoned. People are being tortured. People are being forced to do things against their religion, and they're trying to benefit from it economically as well. And the work that we're doing is to try and highlight this and have them pay for this economically. If part of their goal is economic, we want to really hurt them in their wallets. There are other things we need to do as well, but the sanctions efforts that we're trying to do to stop these products from coming to the United States of America are also essential. I just want to point out also that China is exporting these practices to other parts of the world, including U.S. soil. And there was a report in March of this year that a jury in Brooklyn convicted the head of a Chinese construction firm for engaging in a conspiracy to provide forced labor of Chinese workers working here in the United States of America, where people were working 14-hour days, 7 days a week for several years without receiving any pay. In the United States of America, in Brooklyn. We also have the U.S. Department of Labor announced that a Chinese construction company owed over $13.9 million to 2,400 workers on the island of Saipan, part of the U.S. Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. The Chinese construction firms hired to build the Imperial Pacific Casino Resort project engaged in reprehensible labor practices. They employed workers who entered Saipan on tourist visas and forced workers to labor for over 12 hours a day with no days off, ignoring federal minimum wage and overtime rules. And there's further ongoing litigation regarding worker safety and forced labor. China's goal is to become the dominant world power. They have a plan to do it. We need to look at what it is they're trying to accomplish. We know how they treat their people already. We know how they treat the Uyghurs. We know how they treated the Tibetans and are treating the Tibetans. We know what's going on in Hong Kong. And they want to export this throughout the world. So I want to thank all of our witnesses today for their excellent work that they've done leading up to this point, the research they've done in helping to highlight this to the American people. And I ask my colleagues here to work with us to try and get our Foreign Affairs Committee to finally put our bill forward on the Uyghurs to get this moving so we could join with the Senate, try and get something passed to help make this happen. Thank you very much to everyone, and Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for allowing me to go.
Thank you very much. Senator Rubio.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Mr. Turkle, let me